Next up, we've got another duo intimately familiar to those who played Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald. It's the male and female Firefly pairing of Volbeat and Illumise. Volbeat is the more well-known of the two since, number 1, it shares its name with a Danish rock band, which always draws a chuckle, and number 2, it briefly appeared in the opening scene of Emerald, which was pretty cool. Illumise, on the other hand, hasn't really been seen anywhere notable at all, besides an obligatory anime episode, which it of course shared with Volbeat, and a brief appearance in the Zora arc movie, where it still wasn't the main focus, as it attacked Zorua alongside several other Pokemon, which was of course just a swell thing to do. Today we'll be examining if the same disparity in popularity was reflected in the competitive viability of these two Fireflies, and thus we ask, how good were Volbeat and Illumise actually? And in this video we'll be going over these competitive formats. Volbeat had two key traits that attracted the eyes of many enterprising players. Number 1, it had unique access to one of the best boosting moves in the game, Tail Glow, which functioned like Nasty Plot in Generation 3. Now Volbeat's miserable stats, including an appalling base 47 special attack, meant it wasn't going to be doing any sweeping on its own, but it didn't have to. That brings us to number 2. It also had Baton Pass, meaning it could hand off its +2 special attack boost to a teammate. It also had Trick, which had rare distribution in Gen 3, but unleashing a choice band on the opponent wouldn't have the abusable effect one would hope for. In fact, strengthening the opponent's physical moves was a great way to make an already frail Pokemon even more vulnerable to the attacks that were launched at it, to say nothing of the actual choice banders that be switching into it. Those appalling stats also meant Volbeat had an immensely difficult time even getting on the field, much less safely switching in, getting the Tail Glow boost and baton passing it out. Volbeat's problem wasn't just limited to OU either. UU was far too fast and strong for it to find opportunities as well. In NU it still wasn't great, but the tier's power level had sufficiently been scaled down to where Volbeat could, on rare occasion, find legitimate use. Its resistances to fighting and ground allowed it to make its way in against two common choice banded attacks, Piloswine's Earthquake and Hitmonchan's Sky Uppercut, as well as being able to come in and force out Diglett that had just KO'd something by locking itself into Earthquake. Diglett and Hitmonchan being two of the best, most popular Pokemon in the tier, as well as the fact that most of Hitmonchan's non-banded sets didn't pack Rock Slide, meant that Volbeat was at least going to get opportunities against it regularly. Its frailty was such that even taking resisted attacks from Piloswine and Hitmonchan was usually a dicey proposition, but when Volbeat managed to pass +2 special attack to Rain Dance Huntail, it was all worth it, as Rain Huntail was already one of the scariest Pokemon in the tier and turned into an automatic KO machine with a boost passed to it. Everything in the tier just dropped to it. Huntail wasn't the only Pokemon Volbeat could pass to either. The likes of Haunter, Flareon, and Sunny Day Blossom were similarly terrifying Tail Glow recipients. Of course, even though Volbeat had plenty of game in, game out opportunities and a decent success rate, it still wasn't seeing high usage. At its core, it was still a risky choice. It offered almost no defensive utility, and since the Pokemon it'd be passing to wouldn't want to switch in early on either, its user was usually playing at 4 to 6 disadvantage until Volbeat found its opportunity. Its opportunity that would almost surely be the only one to get all game, as it was difficult enough getting the pass off once. Its high speed meant at least it would be able to baton pass first against most targets, which was good since Volbeat likely wasn't going to be taking many hits actually aimed at it, but that brought its own complications, as it meant the Tail Glow recipient would be getting hit on the way in, which also threatened to disrupt the sweep attempt, and if it did, as was often the case, with the prominence of moves like Explosion and Roar, then the entire game went down the drain. Volbeat was the epitome of high risk, high reward. One way or another, it tended to end games as soon as it came in. The only problem was that it tended to either win or lose the game for its user about the same amount, maybe even skewed a little in favor of losing more than it won. It usually wasn't a matter of player skill either. Surviving long enough and getting Volbeat in might be, but afterwards it was just a matter of whether the opponent could stop the Tail Glow pass or not. It was immensely difficult for even a skilled player to be consistent with such a strategy, as it was more trouble than it was worth to try and set up a situation where the pass was almost guaranteed. That kind of effort was better spent on consistent strategies which weren't as much of a Hail Mary as Volbeat often was. Volbeat had its niche and it was unique and occasionally unparalleled in the destruction it allowed its teammates to unleash. However, for its massive inconsistency, it was rarely used in never used. At least Volbeat had a niche though. What happens when you take away the one good thing from an already niche Pokemon? You get Illumise, which was the worst of the worst. It would have been much better at using Tail Glow thanks to its significantly higher base 73 special attack and could have passed it to boot. But it did not receive Tail Glow, and as such it did not receive any sort of use whatsoever. Yeah, Illumise has some cool moves in Wish and Thunder Wave, but it was not going to be able to provide any meaningful support at all. one was legitimately better off using something like Delcatty instead, which is a sentence that may have never been spoken before until now. That is Illumise's great competitive contribution, allowing other lowly Pokemon to look good by comparison and allowing us to invent new sentences. Volbeat received Encore in Generation 4, which theoretically would act like Trick ideally should have in the previous generation. It would lock the opponent into an unfavorable move, and thus providing the impetus required for Volbeat to get its tail glow off and pass it out. This was more than a little idealistic, and it didn't quite work out for reasons similar to Trick. Sure, Encore increased the number of Pokemon Volbeat could set up on, but it also did nothing to help against how most people dealt with Volbeat, which was switch to something on the turn it set up, then attack it. That usually made the problem go away. The addition of Choice Scarf as well as general power creep, knocking Pokemon like Charizard and Tauros into NU, meant that it was much easier this time around to outrun Volbeat. It wasn't going to be taking hits from these faster Pokemon with its defenses that were even more dismal with these powerful new options available. The ever-present Stealth Rock digging into Volbeat didn't help matters, but realistically, it didn't change much. Even if Volbeat had been quadruple resistant to Stealth Rock or had Magic Guard or something ridiculous, it still would have been awful. And to add insult to injury, there were another Pokemon in the tier capable of passing his teammates +2 special attack, Nguyen, which did the job better than Volbeat, and all things considered, Nguyen didn't do the job particularly well to begin with. Thoroughly outclassed, Volbeat had no semblance of a niche in Generation 4 NU. It joined its friend Illumise, which on paper didn't seem that bad, at least at first. A new stab bug buzz to go alongside the new boosting item in choice specs, and the amazing tinted lens ability to boot, it sounded like enough for at least a Nguyen tier niche, which would have been a major step up, until you realize that the whole thing about bug buzz and choice specs and tinted lens also applied to the excellent Venomoth, which was much faster and stronger than Illumise, while also packing an excellent secondary stab in Sludge Bomb. There was promise at first, but Generation 4 wound up rolling no dice for Illumise. Generation 5 provided Volbeat with some incredible buff. First, Tail Glow went from a +2 special attack boost to +3, which was an unprecedented level of danger. However, that might have been for naught had it not been for the Dream World also blessing Volbeat with the Prankster ability, giving it priority on all of its supporting moves, including Baton Pass. This meant it no longer had to invest in speed at all, and could instead dedicate itself to packing as much bulk as possible, since all it had to do was find an opportunity to take one hit and get the Tail Glow off. It could now do amazing things like set up Tail Glow in front of faster Pokemon as long as it could take one hit, since it would priority Baton Pass afterwards. It could also priority substitute down to a Pinch Berry, lending it some flexibility in passing, and it could do this no matter what powerful attack it was facing down. As a result, Volbeat was able to establish itself as an offbeat but legitimate choice in NU. Of course, this all came with a catch. Generation 5 also introduced Team Preview, which meant Volbeat was never going to catch anyone by surprise. However, the sheer destructive potential of passing a teammate a +3 special attack and potentially a +1 in another stat meant that on occasion it was at least worth trying, even with the inherently risky and therefore inconsistent nature of the strategy. A successful pass to Samurott, whose bulk made it even great at taking attacks on the pass turn, would result in huge swaths of the opponent's teammates being erased at the very least, and was often a game ender. Volbeat could even make it easier for this recipient to switch in safely by opting for a Pinch Berry that boosted one of its defenses, softening the incoming blow. Screen support also went a long way in ensuring the success of the pass. However, the 5th generation was not just notable for Volbeat in the enhancement of its Tail Glow passing antics. With Prankster, Volbeat became a legitimate supporting Pokemon that didn't rely on the all-or-nothing approach. With a Heat Rock or Damp Rock attached, it became a valued member of Sun and Rain teams for its ability to set up extended weather with priority, guaranteeing the conditions its offensive-minded teammates required to succeed. Manual weather teams were always on the risky side, but this was leagues more consistent than Tail Glow passing. Volbeat now just needs one turn instead of two, and that also meant it could feasibly switch out and come back to set the weather up again later. Necessitating only one turn for success meant its Encore, which was also given priority status, was much more capable at facilitating useful situations for it than its Tail Glow passing counterpart. Locking opponents into moves was also a useful makeshift defensive tool for weather teams, whose offensive focus often left them defensively lacking. Thunder Wave was similarly effective and was more direct in obstructing opposing offensive onslaughts. And to top it off, Volbeat was able to provide free switches for those offensive teammates through U-turn, allowing them to hit the field without taking damage switching in. Though Volbeat itself was immensely passive and thus potentially exploitable, its ability to facilitate some of the most dangerous Pokemon around made it an integral part of weather teams. It was so good at doing its job, it wasn't just used in NU, it was sometimes even seen in RU, where its reliability was valued in setting up even stronger weather abusers like Amistar. The nature of Volbeat's playstyle meant it was never going to be metagame defining or consistent, but it had a genuinely solid Generation 5, providing unique, valuable valuable utility and being reliable to the point that sometimes even the tier above called on it. Volbeat was technically untiered because the inconsistent nature of the teams it landed on led to its low usage, but that didn't fool anybody who played NU or RU. They knew and respected what it was capable of. Meanwhile, Illumise was still not worth it at all. It also received Prankster from the Dream World, and its bulk was identical to Volbeat's, but there were two reasons why it was never chosen to run the exact same weather support set. One, it couldn't even pretend or threaten to pass the tail glow. However, just to be fair, let's assume you were running the most obvious weather team ever, and you knew your opponent wouldn't think for a second the Volbeat on that team would be tail glow passing when they saw it in the team preview. Even in this scenario, you still wouldn't swap out Volbeat for Illumise, because the former had a decent base 73 attack stat. Not amazing, but respectable enough for small chip from its stab U-turn. Illumise, on the other hand, had the absolutely pathetic base attack of 47. Realistically, it wouldn't make much of a difference, but competitive Pokemon is all about maximizing the optimization of the smallest details, and thus, Volbeat was always the better choice. If you were really good at NU or RU and also a die-hard Illumise fan, sure, you could make it work and not really notice any difference. However, nobody did that, and as such, Illumise's untiered status was quite earned. Generation 6's addition of PU, the new lowest tier, came at the perfect time for Volbeat. It was unable to keep up with the massively power crept NU, but fit in just fine with the low power level of PU. It didn't even mind that Baton Pass was no longer allowed. That let it focus solely on setting up weather with clinical efficiency, fueling dangerous sweeps like Sun, Sawsbuck, and Leafeon, or Rain, Floatzel, and Beartick. Volbeat was particularly effective on Sun teams as its priority Thunder Wave was one of the few things keeping them from being swept by opposing Jump Bluff, who took advantage of the Sun with its Chlorophyll, while Rain loved Volbeat encoring otherwise annoying walls like Licky Licky into unfavorable teams, which they could then exploit to smash holes in the opponent's defenses. Weather teams were difficult to maneuver with precision, but they were also a great way of taking advantage of the standard metagame filled with Roto Frost and Stoutland. Volbeat's reliability played a major role in allowing Weather to upend these standard bulky offenses and balances. A good player wielding it was often able to pivot it into battle to set up the Weather 3 times, whether against walls or pivoting into offensive Pokemon threatened out by Thunder Wave or Encore. Giving its team so many opportunities to set up Weather was excellent, given that was their greatest obstacle. Volbeat helped its teammates destroy the opponent more than any other Pokemon on Weather, and thus it had a genuine important part of PU, even if it was small in the context of the greater metagame. Once again, its untiered status was more reflective of the overall niche nature of Weather, rather than a slight toward its viability. Illumise, on the other hand, deserved its untiered status and then some, as it still had absolutely nothing with which to meaningfully distinguish itself from Volbeat. Some players tried to make a tinted lens choice spec set work, as it seemed like a good offensive tool on paper, but Illumise was just too weak to dish out damage, even when nothing resisted its bug buzzes. It wasn't too strong in its own right, but it might have been usable if it had a little more in the way of survivability. Sadly, between its frailty and immense weaknesses to common attacks and hazards alike, it could barely get on the field without being KO'd. It didn't justify its use whatsoever, and thus it fell below the lowest tier once again. Volbeat returned to PU once again in Generation 7. The tier had been swept up in a wave of power creep, and Volbeat was now setting weather for terrifying Pokemon like Amistar, Ludicolo, Simisear, and Victreebel. Volbeat also loved having a similar weather setter alongside it. Liepard also had Prankster and U-turn to get its teammates in. Weather teams were still niche overall. Despite the power of the abusers and the ease of setting the weather up, the tier still naturally gave them a difficult time. Jellicent and Assault Vest Electros were two of the best Pokemon in the tier, and were greatly irritating to switch into. Opposing Victreebel were a pain too. The prominence of spikes made the window in which to win close even faster, and the automatic hail-setting duo of Auroras and Abomasnow certainly didn't help matters. Sadly, Volbeat couldn't do much to help with any of these issues, but that wasn't really a slight on it. No weather setter could have really solved such problems. They were just the inherent struggles holding weather teams back as a whole. However, when weather teams were used, Volbeat was an essential part of them. Once again, it was untiered, but that was because of the risky nature of the teams it fit on. Volbeat itself did its job exceedingly well. And as for Illumise, it was the same old story. It was given nothing at all, and it thus stood no chance as it deservedly settled into untiered once again. And that's it. So how good were Volbeat and Illumise actually? Well, Volbeat started out rough, but thanks to Generation 5's Dream World blessing it with Prankster, it carved out a genuine low-tier niche for itself, becoming one of the most reliable weather setters around and completely leaving its former signature move, Tail Glow, behind. Illumise, on the other hand, has never been able to catch a single break whatsoever. It has absolutely nothing to meaningfully distinguish itself from Volbeat, and has never seen the smallest iota of competitive consideration, let alone usage. Thankfully, Volbeat was able to have enough success for both of them, as considering their typing and base stat total, this video easily could have been a fraction of its actual length. Thanks for watching, everyone, and if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False White Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Volbeat and Illumise? What buffs would you give Illumise to at least set itself apart from Volbeat? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.